There are things that can keep teachers awake at night. Conflict between students, teachers or parents, wellbeing red flags and moments of crisis. In schools, educators must respond effectively to these challenges in an ever-shifting landscape. In this series, teachers, school leaders and wellbeing practitioners take on curveball scenarios from everyday school life, and in the process, highlight positive approaches to wellbeing. I'm your host Mick Walsh, and this is Trials for Teachers. Today I am joined by Shane Nankervis, secondary school pastoral care specialist. How are you going, Shane?
I'm very well today, thanks Mick. Going well.
Are you ready?
I'm as ready as I'll be today.
That is great. All right. Please note that the following scenario is fictional and any similarity to events in any real school context, past or present, is purely coincidental. Chloe, a 14-year-old in Year 9, has become withdrawn and often cries privately during class. She frequently reports to staff that classmates are gossiping about her, laughing at her clothes, and intentionally excluding her from group chats and lunchtime activities. While staff observations suggest that typical peer group dynamics may be taking place, Chloe interprets these actions as targeted, malicious, and constant. She has started avoiding school because of the intense emotional distress that this perception causes. Some very difficult elements there, Mr. Nankervis. I'm wondering if we're looking at an initial response, what might be some things we think about?
Well, I think you can't ignore the fact that Chloe feels distressed and under some pressure and feeling the weight of the whole situation. So I think getting Chloe aside and making her feel valued, feel heard, feel listened to is really super important to keep her feelings intact and know that she's really valued in the school community. The timing of that's really important. Like, obviously she feels a bit under pressure. You're not just going to go and pull her out of class. And I think we talked about the timing and finding that really quiet space away from the rest of the cohort is really, really important, because obviously we don't want to heighten her any further and highlight her. She's already feeling a lot of pressure. So that idea that we really keep her dignity intact, we keep it as discreet as we can in the initial instance, I think is super important for Chloe.
Yeah, that picking your moment part, I think that you've highlighted there is really important. And Chloe is someone who has probably, we're seeing that she's got some sensitivities to her environment and the learning environment. So probably a student that wouldn't respond well to a teacher arriving at the door in the middle of class time.
No, I feel like Chloe would rather drop through the floor than the teacher come and ask her a question, even good or bad. Like, I think she just would avoid that at all costs. I think that would really heighten her emotionally. I think in this day and age now, and probably a few years ago, this might not have been the case, but I think we've got so much data on students now, and there's a good chance that this has happened before, or we've got some data on Chloe that we would go to. So before I even attempted to chat to Chloe about this, I think I would go and check the data, check the records, check what information I can find on her, perhaps ask a few other teachers that teach Chloe, just to get a bit more background if I didn't know her well, just to get as much information as I could about her and her situation before I approached talking to her. Now, it's tricky because it could take time. Like, you've got to sort of weigh up, do I have the time to do that? Is it really urgent in the classroom? Do I need to fix it immediately? Or if it's something that's been happening for quite a bit of time, maybe is another half a day going to make a whole lot of difference? But it could give me a lot of information to support Chloe moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And at the centre of that is, as you've said, student safety. And so it is time dependent in determining what investigations you need to undertake in order to get a real clear picture.
Yep.
But speaking to, if you do have that time, speaking to a previous teacher or a previous person that's been involved in her pastoral care would be a really good step. And you might find potentially that there might be some similar dynamics that have occurred previously, and some people might have some strategies that they've been able to apply, and they might have also had contact with the family, which might be really helpful in the conversations that follow. Chloe's experience is valid, I think, is another thing to add in here. Mm-hmm. And even if we don't have a clear picture of what has been happening and whether these girls, what their actions are and how they've upset her in what ways, I think that we need to acknowledge that her experience is valid. And we look at kind of this idea of positive learning environments having a couple of conditions. One is that the student feels safe. they're engaged in what they're doing. They've got a sense of connectedness to what they're doing as well. But they can also see that there is support available.
Yeah.
And clearly for her, the sense of safety and maybe connectedness has dropped.
Yep, definitely. Yeah. She obviously hasn't particularly advocated for herself. So it says here, I think we've got the scenario where someone else has noticed that she's crying. She hasn't got the confidence to come and speak and advocate for herself, which at year 9, we would hope that students would be able to advocate for themselves. So I think there's probably a little bit of work that we need to put into Chloe to make her feel like she's got the confidence to self-advocate and give her perspective on things. Really important that we talk to her and we listen very carefully, and whether it's her perception real or not real, that's how she's feeling. So we need to act accordingly. So that would be one of the first steps, to talk to her. And then I think the next step is to contact home. And straight away what jumps to mind is perhaps if she's really struggling and crying in class, is there something bigger at play? So hopefully talking to home, you might get an idea if it's just isolated to school or if there's something much, much bigger happening in her world that we don't know about. And that could provide the key and the answers to what's happening at school moving forward. Not always, but it could. I think it's a really important step. Sometimes you hit a roadblock, parents don't want to tell you either, so that makes it tricky as well, but I think it's really worth unpacking it with the parent. Two things in that Chloe knows that you're supporting her, we're including the family in the decision making and the support, and then obviously we could potentially find out something that's bigger. And my guess would be that might be the case. Usually something else bigger than school is at play.
Yeah, and that can obviously, other factors can really influence how students feel in a classroom environment. And when that safe space is maybe threatened is when we can see some of the responses from a student like Chloe.
Yep.
So once we've sort of explored those factors and triggers that might be sort of making her feel that way, that conversation with the parent needs to be about that we're going to follow a process to support Chloe. We've had a conversation with her, and I think a parent would appreciate that the time has been taken to hear her perspective. What are the issues at play? And the parent would like to know that we're exploring the dynamic within the room.
Yeah. And look, it could be that she's not sitting next to someone she's connected to in the classroom, that she's sitting next to someone that she feels a little bit threatened by. And maybe it's as simple as asking her classroom teachers to design a seating plan where she might have a friend or a trusted person that she feels a bit more connected to. That might alleviate a little bit of her stress. It could be that we find her something else to do and connected to clubs or sporting activities during recess time or lunchtime to make sure that she sort of builds other connections and feels comfortable in the space. One thing that jumps to mind is, and I feel like this is becoming more common, is that everybody's got their own resilience and coping mechanisms. So it could be that Chloe, for whatever reason, hasn't got great coping mechanisms for sort of the rough and tumble of the playground, and then the people that she feels that are targeting her or bullying her or however you want to phrase it, that they just go with the rough and tumble. They don't feel like anything's going wrong. That's the way they roll all the time. They don't get particularly impacted by things. They just roll on and their life is good. And that's where you get some real friction, I think, and this difference in how people manage and cope. So the person that just rolls along, they're oblivious. They don't know that they're even hurting Chloe. It perhaps needs to be pointed out to them that, hey, do you realise that some of these things are really making Chloe upset? And then on the flip side of that, we need perhaps to build Chloe's coping mechanisms, and whether that's through some conversations or some social coaching or seeing potentially a counsellor or an expert to give her some coping strategies as well. Yeah. So I know I've got this thing stuck on my desk that's, thinking errors, and it's all or nothing thinking. It's magnifying, which is making a problem much bigger. It's catastrophizing. So there's all these things that people fall into traps of thinking errors. And to be honest, I was just looking at that today, and I thought, they are very true. And I would say I fall into those traps sometimes, and perhaps showing that to Chloe, a tool like that, you think, oh, that is me. That is what I do. And because you've never thought about it before.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a really good point. And I suppose in this scenario, there are a range of perspectives. There are a number of people involved, and we need to really shore up our understanding of what's occurring. And so in terms of follow-up actions, there might also be, we've sort of mentioned that you need to speak to teachers about previous scenarios that might have occurred in her learning environment, but going back to current teachers and saying, hey, look, we've had some concerns about Chloe and her experience in the classroom, potentially with these other students. Can you provide any insight, or have you noticed anything that might be concerning at your end? And that also probably is if we're sort of collating evidence of what might have occurred, that's an important step. But also, one thing that you might do is you might have a really low stakes conversation with another student within that environment without mentioning any details of the incident, and just say, hey, just checking in. We check in with our students regularly in classes. How are you finding the class dynamic? Is it going all right? Do you feel that everyone in your class is feeling supported at the moment? And that they might be able to provide you with some insights on that as well.
Yeah, providing it very open and very general. Students are I find they're normally pretty honest, aren't they? So they normally will give a fairly good account of what's happening in a classroom. It's a good way to gather, some what would you call that, qualitative information, qualitative
absolutely.
info on the situation. I think if we can't get a resolution, I think we need to make sure that her teachers are vigilant on what could potentially be happening in the classroom. So we need to make sure that there isn't comments that are unkind or comments that are unsettling for Chloe, and we need to sort of nip that in the bud as well, if they are indeed happening. And then sort of just, we don't want to watch Chloe, but just keep a closer eye on things and what's happening in that room, I think can provide some really important information as well.
Absolutely. And I suppose in managing those allegations, in order to be fair to the process, I think it's important to acknowledge to Chloe and her parent that we will be exploring what is occurring in the classroom.
Yeah.
And you really want to get on top of that as quickly as possible.
Absolutely.
The worst thing that could happen would be you have a conversation with a parent and you say, yep, we're going to be looking at these behaviours that you've noticed. And then the following day, we get really heightened examples of potentially triggering behaviour from other students, and Chloe's in tears again.
Yeah.
So getting in front of that. So possibly in order to buy the time to actually conduct proper interviews, you might say to the girls in the class or the other students, hey, how's everything going in the class today? It might even just sort of flag to them that we're thinking about the environment and the dynamic that's occurring.
Yeah, giving a whole classroom message about this is what we'd like to see. This is, I think that's important as well, and it makes potentially make those students that may be making those comments that, okay, so people have noticed, people have heard, people may have seen, for them to then self-moderate their behaviour. Absolutely. I think is important, yeah.
And that, and if there are interviews that take place, it needs to be conducted in a really fair way with an issue that is sensitive, where there have been allegations brought in around student behaviour. I think that for pastoral care practitioners, it's really important to have a supportive colleague within the environment. That might be someone from your team, someone who's potentially taking notes. It might even just be a staff member who's in the office, who's kind of working on something in the background, but has an ear on what's occurring.
I think we can't have it wishy-washy. We can't just have them come in and talk and go, oh, great, thanks very much, see you later. We need either someone documenting, or we need a written statement from that student, so we've got really specific evidence. We can't just come in, have a chat, what's going on, and then have them walk out the door, because then we forget, we've got a million things going on as well. You think, what did they say? And then you've got this sort of information that could be partially correct, and that is absolutely not what we can have. It needs to be sort of concrete, written down, really evidence-based. And I think that asking Chloe as well, sort of backpedaling a little bit, we haven't mentioned this. Has anyone heard this stuff? Have you got anyone that could vouch for what you're saying? Has anyone else witnessed what's being said? And I think that's really important. And then obviously the tricky bit in that is getting that person discreetly, having a discreet conversation with them, which, that's what you got to be careful. The more people you bring into the scenario, the more messy and muddled it can potentially get. So the way you do that has to be really kind of well crafted.
And the who in that scenario is really important.
Yeah.
The reliability potentially of that student, the level of trust that you have and your confidence in them that it won't sort of escalate the issue further.
Yeah, and you might have to get a couple of students just to reaffirm that. So you might get one student you think's really trusted and maybe an impartial bystander in all this that's not involved, and they might give you some information, but you probably would need to look at getting somebody else as well just to reaffirm and confirm that that is actually what has taken place.
Yeah.
Because as we know, that I think students bend the truth. I think one thing you definitely can't say, and it just springs to mind now, you can't bring a 14-year-old Year 9 student in and say, we're just going to have a confidential conversation, don't tell anybody. I've heard that so many times rolled out by teachers. Oh, well, just this is between you and me, don't tell anyone, we're just going to have this conversation. They're 14, they'll tell someone. So you can't expect to have a conversation with a 14-year-old and think that they're not going to walk out the door and have a chat with their mate. So however you phrase that conversation, do not ever presume that that will be private, because it's definitely not.
No, and look, people, it's probably a aspect of the human condition. You want to take the path of the least resistance.
Yep.
And if you feel that you might be in trouble or close to being in trouble or on the periphery, you put some protective measures in, which might be saying, like, I didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
Whatever it might be. And you're right about that. And probably one way to approach it is to actually rationalise with a student who you've had a discussion with, look, by keeping this conversation confidential in a sense, we're supporting this other person who is having these experiences at the moment. So we need to do our best to do that, whether that happens or not.
Yeah, I think we would say that. We definitely would say, let's keep it confidential. Don't be naive and think it will be, like, because it possibly won't be. They'll on their phone, tell their mate they want to debrief like we all do. So I think you'd just be really careful with that sort of scenario, thinking it will just stay in-house.
Yeah. And look, in different schools have different approaches and escalation policies in relation to how they might manage a situation like this. But if you're at a point where there have been allegations drawn against a group of students and that sort of bullying or could be considered antisocial, I think it's really important that you work within your
constraints of your school.
Constraints, and within your pastoral care system, it's something that you would escalate and inform staff of so that they can triage the situation. But as far as that communication with those other students, to be fair to them, a process needs to be supportive. So as I said, having a conversation with a colleague present, checking that it's okay to speak to the student is often, you don't just sort of say, come here, you're in the office. You say, are you happy to have a conversation with me about this? We've got a problem and I might need your assistance in solving the problem.
Yep.
And generally students will be open to that, and often checking within the conversation, are you happy for this other teacher to be here, is often a good one as well. Yep. And it provides a environment where the students feel like they've been given choice and they've actually really authentically got consent over being in there in that moment in that meeting.
And I think if it gets to the point where there has been something that needs to be really followed up, I think that we still need to come from a position of support for that student. They've made an error, they're 14 years of age, perhaps they have said some really unkind things to Chloe or some things that just aren't okay. We're there to support and help them move forward. Like, they've made an error, and I think we frame it up that, look, you've had a bit of a misstep. This is what's happened. This is why it's not okay. And there's a learning moment in this for you moving forward. And there might be a consequence attached, but it's a real opportunity for you to move forward positively and build better connections in the future. Not about you've done this wrong, you've done that wrong, you're in trouble, and being really punitive about it. I find that teenagers particularly, they don't respond well to being yelled at. They don't respond well to being put down or punitive punishments. I think if we come at it from a position of, look, you've made a misstep, we're really trying to help you move forward. This is X, Y, Z. This is what you can do moving forward. Yeah. I think they appreciate that more than just thinking that they're in trouble. And you want to keep that trust with that student as well. You still want to keep the relationship, keep the trust with the person who may have made a misstep. Yeah,
and look, that's a really important segue to, and what you're talking about there is really a restorative approach to the situation.
Yeah.
And it might be at a point that once you've worked with a group of students, you've obviously let their parents know as well.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to have a conversation about, potential allegations, and then the student goes home and says, this is what I'm being accused of.
Yeah.
That really needs to be...
I think I think we should reinforce that point there, because we sort of haven't chatted about that. If you have that conversation with a student, you definitely need to ring home that night and say, look, I've had a conversation with whoever it may be, this is what unfolded, this is what we're looking at, and be really, really transparent in what we're doing.
If a student goes home and says, guess what happened at school today, and the parent goes, yes, I'm aware, I've received an email.
Yeah.
The email is from an adult who is managing the situation rather than a student who is heightened and worried and thinks that they're in trouble.
Yeah.
And that sets an enormous amount of groundwork and actually helps you to do your job better if you're in the pastoral space as a homeroom teacher or whatever.
Yeah.
It's possible that you might get to a point where you have a group of students who are denying any involvement in sort of, and there's valid experiences on both sides.
Yeah.
And you might have students who say, literally, we have done nothing to upset her. This is what we're existing in this environment. But you also have Chloe's perspective, which is also valid, that she's feeling these things. So you can go down the path of restorative and a mediation once you've got something to work with in terms of we've wronged someone and this is how we make it better.
Yep.
It's a pattern. If we see that again, there's going to be consequences that are applied to that. But you might end up at a point where you've got we're still not on the same page.
Yeah, could happen. Yeah.
And so in that moment, we need to acknowledge that there's different experiences, and we probably need to set some boundaries that everyone is comfortable with and can work with.
Yep.
What do you think that they might look like?
I think that we would just outline clearly, this is what Chloe perceives or feels, and regardless of that, we need to tell those other students or inform them that this causes her to be upset, it's causing her some perhaps school reluctance and to come to school. We can't have those behaviours occur. So moving forward, this is it being really explicit about this is what we cannot see happen, and that might be then some consequences attached to that moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really solid approach there.
But if you had them in the same room, that would be great. If you get to the point where you can have the girls in the same room with a restorative conversation, I think that level of human connection and looking someone in the eyeball and seeing the distress and seeing that it's hurtful, and having Chloe unpack why it hurts her, and then the girls seeing, oh, I didn't really realise that. That's pretty powerful kind of, that's what the restorative conversation is about. It's powerful learning from everybody. So, and then the other girls get to say, well, so we didn't really think that was, that doesn't upset us, but, and you get this connection. Yeah,
and obviously that's the best case scenario that you hope for. But if you're in a situation where parties are not ready for that, the best thing we can do is put in space and boundaries. A couple of additional things is that you'd probably consider those class dynamics. You'd very closely monitor them. You'd have people on board with that as staff members. But also going forward, you might look at where you position that person with this group of people on trips, excursions, in future classes. The other thing that maybe might be helpful to Chloe is some wellbeing or counselling support through the school. And that it's really important not to frame that as like you're in the wrong, Chloe, for having these feelings and perceiving things. It's about we want to assist you in navigating what is a complex situation and to have a sounding board within the environment.
I think we touched on that a little bit earlier about the how what our toolkit is to navigate tricky situations and peer dynamics and people dynamics. And I think that seeing a professional around that, and just giving Chloe a bigger backpack and a bigger toolkit of things that she can use is really what we want to empower her to have.
Yeah, so one probably last element that I think is really important here, and probably for Chloe's benefit as well, is that if communicating to her and the parent that if she does feel unsafe in any environment, right, whether it is there are things that are occurring and we want to be aware of those, or whether it is maybe more perception-based, offering her a place of refuge within the school or somewhere that she can go if she is feeling uncomfortable, I think is a really important one to tick off.
I think absolutely, and I think it doesn't sound like within this that Chloe has a lot of trusted adults, and I think trying to get her to think about who in the school she can go to. So what people could she nominate to be a trusted person? And look, it could be a teacher, it could be the sport teacher, it could be the year level coordinator, it could be whoever. But ideally, I would like to encourage her to maybe go home and brainstorm, or have a bit of don't put her on the spot, but have a bit of time to think about who might that trusted person be, and try and build that relationship there as well. So I think that's super, super important as well. Like, often get people to draw, around their hand with 5 fingers and try and get them to think about who 5 trusted people are in their life. I think is it's a bit tangible for the student as well. Yep. That would be something I think that's also really, really important.
And just to finish off, some key takeaways from what we were just talking about here. We've got a student that is feeling a sense of being unsafe in the classroom environment due to perceived behaviour or real behaviour that's occurring and that she's experiencing in the environment. We talked about that positive learning environment. We were talking about how you can navigate those tricky initial conversations, such as sort of picking your moment to speak to that student, investigating in a way that supports everybody, whether it's Chloe herself or students who are on the periphery, and exploring those factors and triggers as well. We also looked at getting support from staff in terms of what they've observed, whether that's past or present observations that might have occurred. And we obviously want to make sure that we are following up on those allegations with a fair process that is supportive of students in line with what behaviour management policies that people have at their schools. We might end up in a good place. We might end up with a restorative or mediation process, and there might be consequences applied. We might end up with a split perspective, but we're looking for some space. We talked about some ongoing supports, including things like wellbeing and counselling support, resilience development, as you've discussed, and considering those class dynamics, what they might look like in future, and then offering students a safety plan as well.
Yeah, and make sure we document everything.
Documentation is important.
Yeah, I think reacting quickly is super important, but being balanced and not too hasty if you've got a little bit of time is really important. I think a balanced decision and not just jumping in boots and all first up and just gathering. And if you have time, which I know schools, we're under time pressure a lot of the time and we're forced to make decisions really quickly. But if you have got a little bit of time just to think it through and get everyone's perspective, I think we're in a better spot.
Mr. Nankervis, as always, we do a wellbeing wind-up, and we want to hear from you about what is something that you do to lift yourself up on a daily basis.
I like to, well, exercise is my thing, but I'm going to go with something a bit different. I think I know you do this. I like walking the dog. And the reason I like walking the dog, because the dog's always happy. It doesn't yell at me. It doesn't have a bad day. It's happy for a pat. Loves going for a walk. They're always level-headed. Dogs are great. They make you feel happy.
Yeah, look, and we're going to meet on some common ground there, because I think that at the end of a day, when you've got a lot going on, you've had a busy work day, busy sort of, home life with kids, etc., that dog break is actually really good.
But for me, if it's raining, I've got to whip it and it sticks its paw out the front door. It won't go if it's raining. So I think my dog needs some resilience training.
Yeah, but your dog is very sensible, unlike my dog. So my dog will just run out in the rain.
Jump in the lake.
So that's obviously a really good thing to keep you going. Contact us through our socials and have your say. To all the people who hold the line in our schools, while you're all busy taking care of others, make sure to spare some time for yourself. Until next time, this has been Trials for Teachers.